That's why a young brother's open to do anything, anywhere, any place. Buck wild in another court case. It's the code of the streets.
Hi and welcome to this Flash tutorial on Object Orientated Programming and how to start with that. If you've come to this tutorial, it might be that you've been programming on a basic level and have heard a lot about Object Orientated Programming and perhaps want to see what that can do. For me personally, the reason for going to Object Orientated Programming within Flash was to work on larger, more complex problems really, and also the amount of flexibility it can offer you, and also it makes coding a lot easier and more organized once you get into it. And the advantage of that is that it can also help make your code more streamlined as well, so it can reduce the amount of code you're using a lot. Another advantage to Object Orientated Programming is how easily you can reuse bits of code you've done before, and also how well the objects that you create in Object Orientated Programming can be shared amongst a team, which is really important on working in big projects. So perhaps one of the ways to start to talk about Object Orientated Programming is to start with a description of how it works. And one of the things which is useful about Object Orientated Programming is how well it relates to everyday objects and real life and things like that. So for people who perhaps haven't come from a coding background, once you start coding in Object Orientated Programming, you'll start to realize that you're creating real everyday objects. Some of the uses might be slightly abstract, but essentially you are creating objects and that you see around you. So perhaps one of the best descriptions I've ever heard of Object Orientated Programming was to describe it like making a car. Which, if it's the first time, you might think, well, why am I making a car? I want to make a program. But essentially, the elements are very similar. For instance, a car is made up of loads of little bits that come together and create the car. And they might be different bits as well. So you might have an object on a car that's a wheel, and that wheel might have different sizes as well. And this would all be contained in the program inside the classes, and the classes are basically giving them their properties in a similar way you might do in, say, a website, where you could give a class to a scroll bar and give it certain functionality, but there might be different types of scroll bars on your website which might be different sizes and things like that. The class can control that. Then what happens is all these little classes, like the seats, like the wheels, perhaps even the fuel that the car's got or something like that, they come together and create one master object. So the classes are basically the characteristics of an object, and the object creates one master object, and that is the main class. So that has all the characteristics of a car, and it's an object that is created up of smaller objects that have classes in them. One way of describing that inside a video game would be, say if you had you're making a car racing game, you might have different types of cars that you could select, different types of wheels to build your main class of a car that then you would use in your game. So that's another way of taking a real object, especially in video game programming, and bringing it in and using it in that way. Now that may all sound a bit confusing to you, or maybe not, maybe it's cleared some things up, but essentially, if you've used Flash before, you've really created objects already. I mean, if you've used stuff on the stage and you've converted them to buttons or movie clips or graphics, you have created objects. And what classes will do is they'll give those objects behaviors, and they can give them much more functionality than they've had before. I mean, for instance, you might have an object with some sort of tween in it or something like that, but the actual functionality of those sort of movie clips is quite limited. And what classes will be able to do is they'll be able to control these objects and change them. So essentially, you have done this somewhat before, but it's just putting that all into code now, which is the first step, and it can be the most daunting. We're going to start now by looking at the main class, which is the code and document that will bring together all the other objects. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new project which will become our overall class, or what's called the document class. So it's everything's going to be brought into this. So I'm going to create a new ActionScript 3 document from the selection. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this file save as a name, and I'm just going to go ahead and chuck it on my desktop here. Right click, new folder, and I'm going to call this number game. And this I'm going to call number game, all one word there, and save it. So now we've got a FLA saved in a folder on our desktop called number game. Next, what we have to do is go to the properties window. In case you're not using the same layout as me, I'm using essentials, and if it still looks different you can press reset essentials to set it back to this way. If you're happy with how you're working with it, that's fine. So I go to here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to name the document class number game. Now we haven't actually created a number game class yet, and the reason I'm calling it the same name as this is just so I can remember what they're called, you know, that they're associated with each other. So I'm going to edit the class definition, and it says here a definition for the document class could not be found in the class path, so one will automatically generate in the SWF on export. That's fine because we haven't actually created a document class yet. This is actually going to create one for us. Now if I click it again, I get an option here to edit ActionScript 3 class. Which application should I edit the ActionScript 3 class in? Now I've got Flash Professional, and I like working with Flash Professional. I've also got Flash Builder. You can choose one of these. If you haven't got Flash Builder actually installed, it won't come up as an option. So I'm just going to choose Flash Professional and OK that. And up comes a new file here which we're working with, all this ActionScript. Now I'm going to save that file, save as, and I'm going to save it inside the number game as the numbergame.as file, and this is an ActionScript file, so it's pure ActionScript. And what's going to happen here is this, when we publish it, is going to look for this class, and all the code is going to be located in here that we're going to use, and then that will then call upon other AS files that we're using as well, which are going to be objects. So let me explain some of this first. The first thing we have here is a package, and this package, you can think of it like an object, is going to contain different classes. Line 3 of the code then says import, and it imports the flash display movie clip. What it's doing is importing all the properties of movie clips and putting them on the stage, because if you think about it, the stage is incredibly similar to a movie clip. It holds all the objects, it has XY values, you can change the size of it. So essentially we're putting a movie clip now on this stage. Next we have public class number game extends movie clip, and what that's saying is this number game class that we've created is going to have all the properties of the movie clip. So we've imported the movie clip here. We've got to create a public class, which I'll be discussing what that means later. Just for now, make sure it's a public class of number game, which extends all the properties of movie clip. So number game has all the properties of movie clip. Now we're creating a public function number game, and this is where all our code's going to go. And if you've written functions before in ActionScript, this will feel very similar. So now the first thing we're going to have to do is create some graphics for our simple number game. And what our number game is going to do is we're just going to press a button and a random number will appear on the stage. We're going to have to create our button first of all, and I want some buttons with different labels on, and this is the first time we're going to start using Object Orientated Programming to control these labels. So what I'm going to do is just come over here and just grab the rectangle tool, and I'm going to drag out a rectangle on the stage. Mine's white, so that's not very useful. Let's do it again. Control Z to undo that, and just bring up that there. I'm going to convert this to a movie clip. I'm going to call this buttons underscore MC for movie clip. Remember, that name doesn't actually matter when we're actually coding. I'm going to go inside of that movie clip by double clicking on it, and on the timeline I'm just going to insert a keyframe for an overstate, and I'm going to make it this purpley pink. Right, so I've got those two colours, and if I go back to the main scene now, if I press Ctrl and Enter and publish the SWF, you'll see it's looping, and we could put a stop inside of that movie clip like we would normally to stop it, but we're going to control that with code outside of the main document. So I'm just going to delete that off the stage now by selecting and deleting it. Here it is inside my library, and in fact I'm going to edit one more thing on it as well. I'm going to double click on the symbol there, so I'm just inside the movie clip. I'm going to get a text field. I'm going to choose dynamic text, so that means it's text that can change. I'm just going to choose a font. I don't know what font I've got here. Let's up the size of it. And I'm going to call this text. There we are. In fact, I'm going to make mine just a normal, simple, boring font here for the moment. There's some Arial for you. And what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to give it an instance name for the moment, and I'm going to call this label. So this is the instance of label that exists inside here on our buttons movie clip. Now, the next step is to create a class for this. So the class is where we're going to control all the functionality of this movie clip that we create and then we can bring onto the stage. We can do that by right clicking on the object and going down to properties and selecting advanced, and I'm going to export for ActionScript, and here we have the class, and that we're going to create it in a similar way to the other. I'm just going to edit the class definition. Which application should edit it? Again, Flash Professional for me. And here we are with our class. I'm going to save this as buttons underscore MC in the same place. And here we have our class. Now, inside this public function here, there is a bit which says constructor code. And the constructor code is basically where we're going to start giving it all our properties, where we're going to start coding its behaviors. So I'm just going to start off by writing a simple trace statement. Let's save that. So it saves the new updated code. Go to the number game, FLV. Go to number game FLA. Drag the button move clip here onto the stage. And there we go. Now it's asking me to embed my fonts here quickly. So if I just select the font there, I want to embed. As this is only a demonstration, I'm just going to chuck them all in. Okay, and we're going to come back out again. And you can see there, its tracing button works. So the next thing we need to do is to stop this from flashing in this document, which is because it hasn't got a stop action in it. So in a very similar way that we could go inside and put a stop action inside here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my buttons ActionScript file, and all I'm going to do here is just type stop, open bracket, close bracket, save it, and then publish it, Control and Enter. You notice I can publish from here as well, but until I save it, it won't stop. So do make sure that you've saved it. And remember, the little asterisk there in the top corner shows whether it's been saved or not. I'm just going to get rid of that trace statement now. So the next step is to control the text. I want the text to be different and say different things. I'm going to use the same button multiple times, but give each button a different label. And in this one, at the moment, I've written the word text, which is dynamic text, so that will change. And I've given it the instance name of label, which is what we're going to be changing. So if I go to the buttons MC here, if I say this, because we're referring to this actual object that we're affecting, this dot label, which is the instance name of that text that we've given, dot text equals, and then we're just going to start a string here, and I'm going to call this button. Okay, if I save this now and I publish, Control and Enter, you'll see it's changed to button. Now that's all very well, but obviously if I go to the library here now in this document and drag out another, if I go to the main scene, sorry, and drag out another button, you'll see when I publish it, they both contain the same word, and we want to change that. So that's the thing which we're going to look at now. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just remove one of these off the stage by just deleting it. And then what I'm going to do is go to the buttons AS file. And here I'm going to get rid of this line of code here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create what's called a method. And you can think of methods as functions. And I'm going to write it just the same way I would any other function. So if I write public function, as all we're doing at the moment is public functions, and I'm going to give it a new function's name. I'm going to call it change label. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this change label a variable parameter, and I'm going to have a new label, and that is going to be a string. And there we are with the default package there with a capital S. My mistake. Close that. And it's not going to be passing, it's not going to be returning any sort of values. So I'm going to put void there. And I'm just going to open up a couple handlers. What we're going to do now is change the text inside the movie clip by assigning it the parameter of new label, which is a string that's going to be coming in to this AS file from outside. So how are we going to do that? So we're going to say this, just like we did earlier, dot label, which refers to the instance name, which refers to the text box name, dot text equals new label. So basically whatever comes in as the value of new label now is going to be shown as this .label.text equals that variable that's coming in. You'll notice also I don't have to put this inside of a string like I did earlier, like that, because it's already been told that it is a string coming in. So that is naturally now a string. So just to emphasize that, if I save this to update all the changes now, and then I go to the main document here and press Control and Enter, nothing has yet changed, because what we're going to need to do is send a variable for this that will change this, and then when that changes it will change here. But just like any other object that you can have in Flash on the main stage, what you're going to need to do is assign an instance name. So if I go back to the main stage here and I click on the object and I go to properties, I'm going to call this game button there. But the question is now, where do I send the variable to here that's going to change this? And that's going to be set here in our document class. So we're going to write a line of code inside the constructor code area here, and it's going to change this. And this will then go to this object. What we're going to do here is write a new line of code that's going to trigger this class, tell the function to have a new variable named new label, and that's going to go here, and this function is going to fire, which is going to give the label text that we pass to it onto that there where it says label. So let's give it a go. First thing I need to do is name the instance name of the button that I've got on the stage, which is called game button. So if I type game button, and then I want to trigger the function. So this function is going to fire now, and it's going to do this label text. So that's called change label. And then I need to pass the variable to it that we're declaring here, and I'm going to have a string because it's expecting a string, remember. If you look here, it's saying that it's going to be a string that's going to be passed to it, and that string is called go. Let's save that change, and then I'm going to go back to my main FLA, publish it, and then it's changed the text here. So in some ways, what's the point of doing that? I mean, what we've got happening here is in my document class, I'm asking the game button to fire the change label, which is over here, and we're changing this, and we're firing this piece of code here that's saying when I do change label, it's going to have a new variable passed to it, and we're going to fire this line of code, which is going to go that object, whichever object it's in, label.text, and it will give it that new label. Well, it's this reason. If I bring from here, from the library, another button, and this time I'm gonna give it another instance name, which I'll call press again. Now I can go back to here, and I'm just going to copy that line of code. So highlight it all, press Control C, give myself a new layer there, and what I'm going to do is change the instance name to press again, and I'm going to change the string here and press Control and Enter. Oh, save it first, then press Control and Enter, and you'll see it's changed it. In fact, interestingly here, I need to bring the text box out slightly, and now if I publish it, press again, go. So I can now create as many different labeled buttons as I wish just by doing that, and that will affect the instances on the stage of this movie clip here. That's essentially the same movie clip, but now I'm controlling with these classes. So the next thing we need to be thinking about is giving the instances, the movie clips on the stage, this button we're creating, some parameters that are inherent for all of them that we use. For instance, the first one we're going to look at is roll off and roll over. Both of them need to have that functionality, and we can give that functionality to it in the class here. So the first thing we're going to do inside of this public function, buttons_mc, what we're going to do is we're going to come down here and we're going to create listeners. So for any of my students who are doing this, it's very similar to the ActionScript 3 we just do. You just add an event listener, and the listener we're going to do is the same one we'd normally do for buttons. So mouse event dot, and we're going to have the mouse over, and we're going to give it the function name here of m over, for mouse over. And I'm going to close that. Then I'm also going to add another event listener for mouse out. So I'm going to copy that, just paste this down here, and I'm going to change that to mouse out. And here I'm going to change that to mouse out. Then what I'm going to do is we're going to have two more functions down here. So in fact I'm going to put them directly underneath this for the moment. So instead of how we would normally write a function now with inside here, which is function, we're going to have a public function for the moment. So that's one of the only differences between how you would write this sort of code with inside the normal file and here. If you were doing it the way of actually just writing code with inside the timeline of the normal document. We're going to declare the public function, and the public function name we're going to have is over, and then that's a mouse event. I'm lazy, I don't give it the capitals, I just do that and wait for it to come up here. Oh, motion event, let's change that back. There we go, had to write it in the end anyway, serves me right. And that's not returning any values, so I'm gonna void, and then I'm just gonna open up the event handler, and inside here on mouse over we want this dot go to and stop frame 2. Now briefly I'm just going to mention why we haven't used this here, and we're going to. This bit here, although we're referring to this document coming, this instance on the stage of the movie clip, and we're adding an event listener to it, you don't actually have to, because it's said without even writing the code, write this here. But some coders do it just to make sure that when other people are reading it they are absolutely clear about it. So you can still write this and it will work in exactly the same way, and it makes sure that you're aware that it's affecting just this object. I'm also going to need a function for it to go back to frame 1 when we roll out. So if I just copy that function here, change it to my mout, this dot go to and stop frame 1. If I save that now if I go ahead and publish this, you can see that there's still an issue here because you haven't necessarily imported the mouse events yet. And to do that, if you type the following, import flash.events.mouse event, and that will import the mouse events for this piece of code that you're using. Sometimes when you're running in Flash this will come up automatically for you, but in the cases that it doesn't, that's what you'll have to write in. And if I go File, Save, and now Publish, you'll notice it's all working. In fact, what I'm going to do is just go inside of here, go to the timeline, and take this text box, stick it on its own layer, like this. There we go. Publish it again, and now it stays over the 2 frames. Right, so what we've done there is we've just gone inside of our object that we're making here, and we're affecting the classes here. We've said add listener, we're going to do it like a normal button, mouse event, mouse over, and we've given it a function name, then we've given it a public function, and we've said this dot go to and stop frame 2 or 1 depending on whether it's a mouse rollover or a mouse out. So the next step in our basic game here is to extend the project on what we're doing and create another class. And what I'm going to do is create the asset for this class as well. So I'm just going to bring these down here a sec. And what I'm going to do, I could just press Ctrl F8 to do the same thing, but I'm just going to get the text tool here, and I'm going to choose static text, and I'm just going to have the size here as 1. It would help if it wasn't white. So let me just select that again, and I'll change that to black so we can see it. And then I'm going to right click, convert to symbol, make it a movie clip, and I'm going to call this numbers underscore MC. I will come back here and change all this in a bit. I'm going to go inside of that, and on the next frame I'm going to press, oops, sorry, wrong one, F6, and change that to a 2. And in fact, let's do it a few times. So we're going to do 10. F6 a load of times to do that change. And then here I'm going to change that to 3. In here, change it to a 4. 5. You don't have to do this many. 6. 7, 8, 9, and the last one, 10. You'll notice I'm not going to put the stop in here as well, like you have before. There we go. So let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is create a class for this now. If I go to the library and I right click on it and go to the properties, we're going to create a new class for it here, and it's called numbers underscore MC. And let's go ahead and edit that class and choose a Flash Professional Builder. Here's our new class, and same as before, I'm just going to go to File, Save As, and save it as numbers underscore MC. You could just call it numbers if you wanted to. The underscore MC, you know, it's not really a movie clip anymore, so you could remove that if you wanted to when you were saving it. So let's do what we did last time. Let's stop these numbers from just spinning around as they do. Let's just update that, save it, go back to the numbers, and you'll see it's stopped. In fact, I'm just going to bring that forward a bit. So let's have a look at that. There we go. So it's stopped, so we know that we're actually affecting our main document. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to trigger the numbers, and we're going to make them either go to 1 to 10. It's going to be a triggerer here inside our class that we're creating. So let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is create a public method. So remember, methods are similar to functions. Public function. And what we're going to do is I'm going to call this random number, and that's not going to be returning any values back to us, so void, and then let's open up an event handler, and what we're going to do is say this, so this is our numbers movie clip dot go to and stop. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a random number, and to do that, and it's a random whole number as well. So if I write math.c and then open up another bracket again, and it's asking for a number, and what we're going to do is math.random. So this is going to give us a random number. Oh, 10 times 10. I'm going to close down both of those brackets. So what we're doing here is creating a random number here with math random between 0 and 1, and we're timesing that by 10, and math ceiling here is going to round up any decimal point. So that equation there, or that rather line of code there, should give us our numbers 1 to 10. So we've already got on our main stage here, we have got an instance of this here, but we're going to need to affect it with code. So I'm going to call this numbers 1. And that's the name of the instance name here. And if we go inside of our document class AS here, and inside here we're going to assign a listener onto the instance of numbers 1. So let's go ahead and create a listener. So if I write create listener as our function, and what we're going to do here is create a private function this time that's only associated with this class that we're doing here. So if I write private function, so this is not acceptable by any other class, and create listener. So if you see there, what we've done is we're going to trigger, as soon as we open up here, this function here that's going to fire here and use this function. So create listener, I don't want that to return anything, so that's void. And then let's open up the event handler. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the go button to actually trigger a mouse event. That will then choose one of the numbers. So if I go here and go game button, which is our go button, and we'll be getting probably rid of the press again button in a second. Button there, dot add event listener. So that's all very usual stuff. Mouse event dot click, and let's call this random num. In fact, I'm going to have that like that. Random num. Next we need to create a public function. So public function, and this is the public function for random num. And this isn't going to return anything either, but it is a mouse event. So first of all, random num, and this is a mouse event, so I'm just going to select it there. I am so blind. There we go, mouse event. And then, this time by the way, you'll notice that because I've done mouse event, put it in here, it's actually put it up here automatically. Mouse event. This isn't going to return anything. And then let's make the function, the event handler. Let's make the event handler. And inside here we're going to go numbers 1, which is this instance here. Dot, and then we need the code here, so that's called a random number. So that's the function name there. So now it should do this go to and stop, so it should be firing this line of code here from this here. So let's make sure everything's saved. Let me save that. Let me save this. And let's publish. Now I've got an error there. and it says that it is a call to a possible undefined method, create listener. Now, what could that mean? First thing to check normally is that things are spelt correctly, and in my sense, it isn't. So always check that first, that things are spelt wrong. That's always the first error you come to check. Let's save that again. And now if I press the go button, there we go, that's all working. And I'm going to get rid of this button for the moment, so let's just neaten this stage up a bit. That was the press again button I got rid of. Let's have a publish. And also I need to get rid of the press again code here. There we go. So now let's have a look at our numbers class here. With this numbers class, number_MC class, it's assigning this attribute here of the random number to the actual instance on the stage using the go to and stop method. But say if you were creating a game or something, there's no actual real number being created. We're only going to and stopping where it is here. There's nothing being stored which would then say move your character 4 spaces or move your character 10 spaces or something. There's no variable which is holding this for us. So we're now going to have to create a variable that holds that for us. And a variable inside a class here is called an attribute. So we're now going to start giving our class some attributes that can be used. Generally, in ActionScript, you would create your variables at the top of the document as best practice. With inside here, this is where our document really starts with inside here. And we want to do it just before the constructor as well. So we need to declare these variables before the constructor. So this is where the attributes will go. Now, variables will have to have a public or they can have a private space. We're just going to continue with the public for the moment without confusing them too much. So let's go ahead and create a variable. If I was creating a variable normally, I'll just write var, but here we're going to call it public var, and then I'm going to call this num value, and then we have the option of saying what sort of variable this is. Now, essentially it's a number, but numbers can have decimal points and stuff in Flash, whereas integers, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and so on, don't have them. And if I do an unassigned integer, that will give us only a positive value back on that as well. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 10, carry on like that, without decimal places and only in positive value. So we know that that variable is going to hold that type of object. You could use a number here still, but it's not as elegant a way of doing it because of the decimal places that can be held there. So we do know that these should always be round numbers that are held in that variable. And now we can access this in our entire project. Now let's do some change to this code down here. It always looks more complex in these actual ActionScript files, but compared to programming just on the stage. But essentially now we're going to do a similar thing that we're doing in lots of other projects. We're going to assign the variable to this number here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out here. And I'm just going to paste it there. And let's assign the variable num value this value. So what I'm going to do here is at the beginning of it, just go num value equals, and that will give us the number that we want. Then we want this dot go to and stop num value. So we've declared our variable. Our variable is equivalent to this go to and stop num value. And in fact, if I trace it here, oh, it's not come up because I need to save it. 6, 6, 6, 10, 2. So now we're actually giving it an actual value that we can then use in some way. So now, whenever we create one of these dice, it's going to have this functionality attached to it as well. And we can also trace this outside of here as well. So if I get rid of that from here and press Ctrl S to save it to make the updates, and I go back to the document class, and with inside here I can also trace, and I can trace the instance name of the object, which was let me just check again, I think it was random numbers 1. So I can trace numbers 1 dot, and then I can use the same code from here, which is num value. So that's the variable. And let's save that and publish. And you'll see it's doing the same thing again, but we're accessing it outside in the document class by just going through the instance and using the dot syntax, and then associating the value, or the attribute, now we're calling the attribute that is here with inside this class. So we are now grabbing attributes. However, now we're going to have to look at what is the difference between a public and private value. And it's quite interesting to see here that this is a public, it's being called publicly. However, let's have a look at a private function now, because this is a public function at the moment, and that means it can be changed outside of the document, the actual number that's changing. So let's just have one last check a sec. If I press Ctrl and Enter and publish it again, and I've saved it, there's the number that I'm getting. But that number can be changed outside of the dice document like this. If I say type numbers 1 dot num value equals 4, no actually let's equals 8, and I'm going to retrace it here. Oh, sorry. I'm going to trace it again. We're going to trace two numbers now. So it's going to trace twice. So if I just save that and then publish, remember always save and publish, you'll notice that although the first one's a bit of a fluke, that it's out of sync. I'm always getting 8 as well as 2 because I'm tracing twice. That one's giving me a value of 2 and that one's giving me a value of 8. And really I only want the number that is from the function here, and I don't want to be able to change it outside of the document. That could cause problems in the future. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn this into a private variable. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a variable that is only accessible with inside the actual numbers here that we're creating, and we can't set it outside of this document at all, but we do need to be able to access it as well. And it's very easy to turn this into a attribute that will only work inside of this class. And what I do is I just type, and now that will only work with inside of this class. It's a private attribute. And remember, variables are attributes. But let's see what happens to our document now if we save and run this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. I'm also going to go back here and delete those 2 lines of code and save that. So we've only got the numbers 1.random number and the trace there. I'm just going to save that. And I'll go back to my AS file for numbers, the class, and run it, press Ctrl Enter. And now I get this error here. Attempt access of inaccessible property num value. That's because that attribute now is private and I can't access it outside of this class. So what we're going to do is try and create a public function that will give us that value, and we can return it to other classes and other areas around our documents. Let's go ahead and create a public function called getNum for getNumber. So if I write public function, and I do need a space in between those, and I'm going to call this getNum. So that's our function created, but we do need a value this time. So wherever we've been writing void before, because they're not going to carry anything in here, this is going to carry a value with it. And the value that we're creating is up here. It's this type of value again, so an unassigned integer. So let's just create some event handlers, and we want a value returned. So the value we want returned is return, and we're going to return the num value, and save your document there, so Control S. But how are we going to get this into our document class? Well, let's have a look here. If I go back here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the trace here, but this time what I'm going to do is we're going to return this function here, getNum. So that function will hold the integer now of this, which is the num value from up here. So if you look here, we're actually firing a function, taking it into this value here. This value, this attribute here will then pass it down into here, the function, which gives us that, and we're going to take it back to here. So I need to do get num. So what I'm going to do is just change this trace here. I'm just going to come along here and change this to the function now. So I'm going to go numbers1, inside it I'm going to fire this function here, get num. It's a function, so I need to open and close brackets, save that, publish it, and now you'll see I'm getting that private attribute from here, and I'm taking the private attribute, putting it down to a public method, and that public method is being called here with inside the trace of this document class. So now if you try to do any of the changing the number from out here again, you will get an error. But we have created what's called a public way of getting a private attribute into a public method and back to our document class. So essentially here what we're starting to do now is create an API, if you've ever heard of that, which is an application protocol interface. And what that basically means is we're setting parameters now for what is accessible in certain classes and outside of classes. However, looking at our main document class here, you'll notice that when we're tracing the numbers1.getNum, really we want to be getting the attribute name, almost like we did earlier. And the attribute name up here is, on the numbers class, is here, num value. That's the attribute that we want to be able to access. And if you're doing sort of like games and stuff, you don't want to be getting them, you want to be using attributes. You don't want to be having to fetch them in certain ways, you just want to be using the name of it to get it. So, you know, there's no way that if I wanted to access this as a method, I don't want to be using the method's name because I won't remember it. I want to be using the attribute's name, because it might be something like car wheels, or it might be something like petrol, or it might be something like speed, or something like that. You don't want to have to declare the attribute and then use a method name in another document to get it. So how do we go about doing that? Well, the way of doing that is to change this function here. And instead of getNum, which was the method's name, what we're going to do is we're actually going to get the attribute value here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go get, and then I'm going to go get num value. So that's now going to go and get the num value. However, this function here now has the name of num value again, and that's going to cause a conflict between where we've used num value up here for the attribute itself. So inside of these sorts of documents, when you're using private names, you generally use an underscore. So here, where I've given it its name, public function there, here, and even here, that now, the underscore is going to say that that is private. That's just a general way that you work with code, to say that underscore is generally private. You don't have to do that, but you will start getting conflicts of interest. Now where I've got num value here, that's going to say that this is public. So I can use that name now, which is the same as the attribute essentially, to be called in other classes. If I save that now to update all that, come back here, I can just use the attribute name essentially, which is numValue, and publish this again, save it first. You'll notice I have a little error here, which is it's flashing, it's still saying it's a static number type, and that's because here I haven't got rid of the method handlers there, so it should just be numbers1.numValue, which is that there. So let's come back here, save it again, publish it, and now it's working again. So let's just run through that again. What we're doing here is we have all the private variables. We declare the private variable or the private attribute, and that's all being used here, and then we use a public function and we get the num value. So we're saying that's a public, that is now a public attribute. Now we're changing its method to that's name, and this get here is allowing us to get that from outside of the document. So what we're going to try and do now is create these two movie clips dynamically at runtime, because it's not often practiced that you actually put your objects on the stage inside an object-oriented program. You actually generally call them from the library so they can be reused many times again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight both these and press delete, but do remember the instance names that you've been giving these, because although we're going to do it this way now, the code that we've been writing has been associated with pressing numbers 1 and pressing the game button. So I'm just going to delete both those off. And let's just save that and go to here inside our document class. And it's here we can create those objects and put them on the display, and they'll be able to do everything we were doing before. However, all the attributes of these movie clips that we're going to be putting on our stage have to be created for the constructor code. So we're going to name and create our objects in different steps. So let's go and create here a public variable that's going to be a numbers 1, and that's going to be a numbers underscore MC. So that's going to be part of my movie clip class there. And let's go ahead and also create another public var that is going to be the button one, which we called game button. And game button's going to be part of the buttons class. And if you're wondering about these classes as well, you can see they're up there. So, but you'll notice that now that we're starting to put these into it, our actual code hinting is coming up with, if I do that again, oh sorry, it's buttons. These packages now, which are our classes. And let's save that there. And that's because all our classes that we're creating are in exactly the same place as our FLAR file. So it's able to find these classes. Anyway, so what that's done is we have now created the names of our objects. That's why we've had to use the same names again, because later on we've used game button.add event listener and things like that. In fact, looking at that, it should be game button with a capital B. It's going to be the same way, case sensitive. We've created the names and we've said they're part of this class, but what we haven't done is actually created the objects yet, and we need to invoke their constructor. So where are we going to do these? Well, what we've done is we've created these objects, which the names of these objects, but this is where the actual code is triggered within inside this constructor code here when we actually construct our code. So we're going to need to put them in here. So what I'm going to do here is just go numbers 1 equals a new, and it's going to be a new part of the numbers underscore MC default package, and semicolon there. And then I'm going to do the same for the game button. So the game button equals new, and we're going to say it's a new, and there it is, just by pressing enter, new buttons MC. I'm just going to separate these two so you can see that clearly, and that now will create them. The only thing I need to do actually is just create the functions there and there. So that now, if I save it and run it, Control Enter, won't throw up any errors, and it is creating them, but we're not displaying them on the actual stage yet, so that's the next step. So let's add these to the display stack. Now the display stack in Flash is almost like a tree of how things are being stacked. So on top you have the stage, and beneath that you can add children to objects and to movie clips. You might have heard of adding children before in Flash. But what we're going to do is we're just going to add it to the main document, which is basically the main stage. So I'm going to add child. So I'll add it to the main document, add child, and the first child I'm going to add is numbers 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add child again, and I'm going to add game button. Okay, let's save that and publish, see what happens now. And you'll see they're both up here now. That's because that's the X and Y coordinates relative to their actual instances. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to move them around the stage. So to do that, we're just going to change the X and Y of these objects. They've now got these names. So let's go ahead and go numbers 1 dot X. Remember, it's not dot underscore X anymore in AS3 3. Dot X equals and let's say 250. Actually, let's make it 200. And then numbers 1 dot Y, let's bring it down a little bit, equals perhaps 50. And then let me just finish those lines of code there. And then what we have to do is we do the game button. So game button dot X equals, and let's do this at say 50, and let's do the game button dot Y equals 50. And you can play around with those yourself. Bad practice there. I should be finishing off those lines of code. Okay, let's save that. Let's publish it. And I see we've got, well, they're both in the same position really. So what we need to do is I'm going to bring down the game button down on the X-axis. So let's have a look at the game button here. Let's make the game button X equals, sorry, the Y. So let's bring down the game button Y to 250. Let's save it, update it, and there we go. I could probably move it along a bit more, so let's make the X maybe 150. And let's bring down the Y of this a little bit, so I'll make this maybe 100. Oh, no changes because I haven't saved it. Let's save it and publish it again. And there we go. The good thing is now we haven't got anything on the stage. We're dynamically creating everything through ActionScript and through the library. So we haven't actually got anything on our stage at all. By now your head should be spinning, and that'll probably be enough, but there's one last thing that we need to do to improve our classes. And what that is up here we're creating our actual buttons separately, but we're still creating the label independent from that. And we should really be creating these labels inside of the actual class itself, because no one's going to have to want to customize every label each time. It'd be nice if when we create the class we can define the label itself in one line of code. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify its constructor, and when I say its constructor we're talking about the button class here, its constructor, to accept a value, and then use that value inside of the class to populate the actual label. So within inside our constructor of the buttons, now button underscore MC, I'm going to give it a new label parameter. Remember, that's basically a variable. When I say parameters and attributes, they're basically variables that can be held there. And that new label is going to be a string. Make sure you use the capital S. Now we've created our new label string, what we can do here is use the change label method up here to add to the new label. And I can change the label to new label. If I save that and go back to the document class here, what I can do is I can remove this line of code here where I create the button there and the title, and I can come up to here and where it says where I'm actually creating, the game button, I can just write in here go, save it, publish it, and it works exactly the same. So what essentially you're doing here is you're using the constructor of the buttons underscore MC class to automatically populate some attributes here that I can then just input and change. For my students, if you've ever used the tween classes before and you've had to input, you create a new tween and then you input parameters, that's a very similar method to what we're doing here. This is the start of how that was created. So anyway, that should be an introduction to some actually quite complex object-oriented programming ideas there by the end of it. But that's how object-oriented programming can work, and there's much more you can go on to learn, and certain design patterns that can help you as well with inside object-oriented programming. But for now, thank you for watching.